Welcome to the Friends of Dan Music Podcast. I'm Dan Miles. You've been listening to the music of Kenwood Anderson and Nate Morton. That's a track called Cinnamon Raisin that can be found on their recently released Funky Jazzy Stuff album. When Nate was with us back on episode 47, we went into great detail about his experiences working as the house drummer on NBC's The Voice, and also his excellent 2006 solo album, Playground Philosophy. So anyone who's interested in those particular topics, I would encourage you to go back and check that episode out, because today we're going to be focusing on this new release. Joining me from Los Angeles to discuss it is our friend Nate Morton. Welcome back.
Dan, thank you so much for having me back. It is a pleasure to be here.
So this is episode 123, and as I said, last time you were here was 47. That aired in February of 2013, so believe it or not, that was just a little bit less than 5 years ago.
Almost a half decade.
That's right. Did you think you'd still be doing The Voice in 2018?
You know what? I didn't know if I'd still be doing The Voice 3 months after we started doing it, and then it just turned into this thing that kept on rolling and rolling. I mean, I've been fortunate to be involved in several TV shows, but unfortunately, a lot of them kind of had a brief run or had an abbreviated run. And The Voice has really, been something that's had legs, and we're still here 13, 14 seasons later.
Yeah, in 2013, you'd calculated that you and your bandmates had played on over 400 iTunes singles, and we were predicting that at the rate you were going, eventually you'd hit 1,000. Do you know what the count is up to now?
I lost track. We're well over 1,000. It's been a great ride, and lots of great contestants, lots of great songs out there. The last time I checked, I felt like we would have been, I feel like we would have been close to 1,700 or 1,800, and that was some time ago. So, yeah.
By this time, there's a lot of songs you guys have performed more than once, with different vocalists. Do you know if there's a particular song that holds the Voice record for the most versions of at this point?
Oh, that's an interesting question. No one's ever asked me. The most versions of? I don't know about that, Dan. For some reason, the tune Gravity pops into my head because we've done that a couple of times. Mm-hmm. What else have we done a few times? It's hard to say. It's really actually hard to say. That's a tough question. I'd have to look it up online and find out what the actual numbers were. I will say this. I will say in terms of numbers of downloads, I know that this isn't really the question that you asked, but this past season, Chloe Kohansky pretty much crushed in terms of downloads. She actually had 3 number one iTunes, if I'm not mistaken, 3 number one iTunes singles, the most iTunes number one singles of any previous Voice contestant.
Wow, amazing. But as I said at the outset, we're not really going to be concentrating on The Voice this time around because we've got this smoking new album to talk about. I have to say I'm a little bit on the fence. I mean, you're calling it funky jazz, but to me, it seems a little more like jazzy funk.
I knew you were going to say that. But then isn't that the beauty of music in its subjectivity?
But would there be a difference between funky jazz and jazzy funk?
Well, I don't know, but the record got named because once upon a time, so Kenwood, when we were in the studio recording it, Kenwood was like, "Hey, let's shoot a little video of, what's going on right now." And I kind of said like, "Okay, cool." And as we were chatting, he and I were talking, and I said, "Hey, this is a bunch of funky jazzy stuff." And then at one point, he and I both broke into song, which Kenwood has a nice singing voice. I don't. I shouldn't be singing anything under any circumstances. But we both broke into a chorus and in unison said, "Can't get enough of that funky jazzy stuff." And then that was it. It was done after that. The record had a title.
Even though you've got equal billing and a couple of writing credits, Kenwood Anderson appears to be the primary writer of the material on the album. So let's start by having you tell us how you guys met and what led to this collaboration.
Kenwood and I actually went to school together at Berklee College of Music so many years ago, and we were buddies sort of in passing, and we would see each other from time to time. But it really wasn't until after both of us, we sort of, I won't say we fell apart, but I would say we, fell out of contact. And then it wasn't until several years later out in Los Angeles, California, and we sort of bumped into each other. Our paths crossed again, and we started communicating. And Kenwood said, "Hey, I just did this record of my own. Check it out." And I said, "Oh, hey, that's really cool." And then that sort of sparked our reconnection. And then at some point, sort of down that road, Kenwood said, "Hey, you know what? You actually need an album under your own name. You know, I have a penchant and a talent for production. I would really like to work with you on putting together an album under your own name." And that was the genesis. That was the beginning. And so he and I started working together. He basically, it was Kenwood is the master producer. I mean, I can't really take credit for any of that. Kenwood definitely was the person who said, "I've got this song, I've got this song, I've got this song idea. What do you think about this? What do you think about this vibe? Hey, I was checking out some of your influences, and I came up with this little melody, or I came up with this little rhythmic groove." And he would basically bounce ideas off of me, and I would go, "That's great, that's great. Can we change this here? I love that. Can we make this a different feel here? I love this." But really, I cannot take anything away from Kenwood. He was absolutely sort of the mastermind musically, and I was basically the sounding board.
Well, Kenwood does play bass on the album, but his primary contribution seems to be as a keyboard player. There's great keyboard playing all over it. And then beyond the two of you, the only other credited musician is Steve Feckety. So how do you guys know Steve?
Steve Feckety is a cat that I worked with. He's a burning guitar player. He has a long, long list of professional credits. His path and my path crossed when we began playing together on the second season of the Bonnie Hunt Show, which was a daytime talk show on NBC.
Yeah, he's an amazing guitar player. And then I got to ask, who exactly is Lemon Drop Swagga?
You know what? I'm going to leave that. I'm going to let that be a mystery. And at some point when you interview my partner, I'll let him shed some light on that for you.
Well, I was sensing another Malik Shabazz. I was like, okay, they're definitely, this is definitely like a little bit of a taunt here.
Well, let's just say if you had myself and Kenwood listed on one side, and then on the other side you had Malik Shabazz and Lemon, then, you could connect the dots.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's an awesome clue. And I would be very interested in having Kenwood come on. We'll definitely have to arrange that. Well, I want you to know that when I first heard about this album, before I'd even heard a note of it, I ordered a CD. I invited you back on the show to promote it. I didn't even go and sample the 30-second little bites. I just bought it because that's how much confidence I have in you as a player.
I hope that I did not let you down.
You most certainly did not. No, not at all. I know you'd never attach your name to anything that was subpar, but this is completely different than Playground Philosophy. So my initial impression of this material, the first time I heard it, front to back, start to finish, was I detected a real sense of freedom in musical terms because it isn't confined or restricted by the type of parameters that you usually have to deal with. You have coaches, producers, contestants, on a gig like The Voice or even just a regular studio gig when you're supporting an artist. This sounds like you're like free, like you're out of jail. Go do what you want to do musically. No one's going to tell you no. Is that what appealed to you about doing the project?
Dan, I find it interesting that you started the question by comparing and contrasting this record to Playground Philosophy, because stylistically, yes, they are different, but then your description of this record is literally to a T exactly also the description of Playground Philosophy, in the sense that Playground Philosophy was born out of a mindset where I felt like, you know what, I'm tired of artists telling me, that's too folky, or it can't be that rock right here, or no, it doesn't make sense to go into a reggae groove here, or, that's too fast, or that's too slow, or whatever it was. And so that kind of set me off on Playground Philosophy, where I was kind of like, you know what, I enjoy playing with all these artists. I enjoy making a contribution to their projects, but ultimately it's their project and they are the determining factor in what I get to do. I wish I had something where I could just do whatever I wanted to do. Sky's the limit. I can play whatever I want. I can do whatever I want. If the tune is reggae and I decide to go into a punk rock groove in the middle, no one's going to stop me. So that's the way I approach Playground Philosophy. And as you very astutely just now pointed out, that's also the beauty and the attraction and the motivation behind Funky Jazzy Stuff. It's like, it's great when Kenwood basically presents I won't say a blank canvas, because it wasn't a blank canvas at all. It was a canvas that had different, nooks and crannies and musical topography that he had developed. And then he kind of said, hey, here's here's the landscape. Why don't you go ahead and do what you want to do? So if you want to run in the field of grass that's over here, that's groovy. If you want to jump in the lake and swim across over here, that's groovy. If you want to run down the side of that fence and take your stick and go tuk, 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 down the side of the picket fence on the sidewalk, that's groovy too. He set up the sort of, I don't want to say parameters, but he sort of set up, it's almost like in a video game where you've got the backdrop, but then what you create on top of that backdrop, sky's the limit, you know? So that's very much the way this record was. I mean, Kenwood definitely said, here's the idea, here's the song, here's the form I'm imagining. What are you going to do with this? At no point did Kenwood say, this is a reggae song, or this is a pop song, or oh, this is a jazz song, or oh, you should go to Latin here, or oh, you should go to go-go here. That was all sort of me just hearing it going like, hey, what just happened inspired me to go this direction. What do you think? And Kenwood was definitely like, hey, man, I'm buckled up. Let's go. So that's the way that project kind of developed. And that's why, even though stylistically it's very different from Playground Philosophy, they are both born out of a similar mental construct.
Well, being an instrumental album, at what point did these tracks get titled? Because was it like, hey, I have a title, or is it like, well, after it's done, well, let's call it this, or was it different each time? I mean, you know, well, for example, you know, we just spoke a minute ago about most of these titles are originating with him, so it's probably better to ask him. But, you know, here's a 3-word combination you don't often hear: Shakespearean fruit bats.
Man, I was afraid you were going to say that one, because that's a Kenwood all the way. But then some of the others, like, for example, Noisemaker Deluxe, strangely has the same initials as Nate Morton drums.
Yes. Well, this I did notice when I saw when I remembered Nicholas David, our friend Nicholas David, telling you he saw NM on your drums and said, "Oh, you like New Mexico? Are you from New Mexico?" You know, obviously it meant Nate Morton. And so when I saw Noisemaker, I got, yeah, Nate Morton, Noisemaker. And I didn't pick up on the deluxe being Nate Morton drums, so that's pretty cool. I knew there was a relation to you because also it kind of relates to the track, particularly as a track develops. I wouldn't call it noisy, but it's definitely some free-spirited bashing going on.
It's crunchy. I like to call it crunchy.
And then there's a tune called Interns from Neptune.
I'm going to leave that one to Kenwood too. I hate to do it to you, Dan, but I'm going to let Kenwood call that one as well.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to name check the titles, just sort of intrigue the listeners, because we're not playing those tracks, although they're great tracks. The first one that I actually want to play also has an interesting title that conjures up some interesting imagery. Why don't you give us your comments about it after we listen to it? From their funky, jazzy stuff album, here are Nate Morton and Kenwood Anderson performing track 9 from the album, which is called Rhinoceros Foxtrot. I guess if I was a rhinoceros that wanted to foxtrot, that would fit the bill as well as anything. Tell us about that spot about 3.5 minutes in where you start playing a completely different beat. Was that scripted or was that spontaneous?
The part that you're referencing actually occurs in the middle of the I'm Making Air Bunnies drum solo, which I'm making air bunnies because drum soloing, I'm making more air bunnies. There's lots of bunnies around. Drum soloing is not exactly what I sort of make my living doing, but it is something that when given an opportunity, I sort of, enjoy trying to explore. That said, I generally tend to explore it within the confines of a pocket or sort of time or a groove. And so my natural tendency, rather than launching into chops and licks and all of that, my natural tendency is to kind of say like, okay, how else can I interpret, the time going by right now? How else can I interpret this tempo? And sometimes that kind of thing is born out of it. I'll discover like, oh, well, here's an interesting polyrhythm that's kind of related. And then, oh, well, what if we develop that? And then, oh, what if that grows in this direction? And so that's kind of the way that I sort of develop things at times in a given drum solo. So that's kind of what's going on there.
Well, in a setting like Berklee School of Music, will that sort of thing be frowned on or encouraged, that sort of departure?
Berklee College of Music, in terms of soloing, I think there's a fair amount of respect for anything that anyone does musically, in terms of soloing or not soloing, quite frankly. I was never a chops guy. I was never the guy who, it was like drum solo and the whole band leave the stage for 15 minutes and I just like shred the drum set for, 15 minutes. That was never really my bag. I was always trying anyway to find ways to play things that were musically somehow related to what was going on in the context of the song. It's part of the reason why my sort of timeline has taken me in the way that it has, in the sense that I'm typically playing pocket. I'm typically playing Western music in 4/4 and grooves and songs with a set form, and rarely playing, insane chop out stuff. That said, it's great to have a project like this where it is like, oh, okay, hey, here's 32 bars of drum solo. Here's 64 bars of drum solo. And I do have the opportunity to sort of turn on that part of my brain and try to explore what goes that way. Now, in terms of being at Berklee, there were so many cats with so many different styles and so many approaches that I think that everything had its place. I've actually talked about this a little bit previously, which is that I sort of struggled with that a little bit when I was at Berklee because, everyone hears the cat who has the most chops. Everyone hears the guy who goes, and they just destroy the drums and they go, oh my God, have you heard so-and-so? He's a monster. Oh my God, have you heard this guy? He's a monster. Meanwhile, in my head, I kind of went, with all due respect to all of that, I want to try to create something that still relates back to the song. Like, to me, it was always about playing songs. So as a result, the way that has manifested is even when I'm playing a drum solo, I'm still singing a song in my head. I'm still thinking about the pocket. I'm still thinking about the groove. So while some may find that confining and feel like, oh, it's a drum solo, man, just go for it, go crazy, I have to admit that I still like being able to at least impart a piece of the original groove or the original pocket, or keeping some element of the time involved in what I'm doing, even when I'm soloing.
Yeah, I get it.
You know what I mean? If that makes sense, I've always tried to play music. And again, that's not to imply that drummers who have all those chops aren't playing music. But in my head, like I said, I'm always singing a melody. I'm always singing a melody. I'm always humming a groove in my head. I'm always thinking about something as it relates back to sort of the thread of the musical fabric of whatsoever the context is that I'm expressing myself within.
No, I get it. What catches my attention with drummers and with anybody else is usually just something I haven't heard before. It doesn't have to be flashy. It can be subtle. It can just be something I haven't heard before. I remember the Zeppelin track, 4 Sticks, where somebody said, oh, Bonham's playing with 2 sticks in each hand, something simple.
Yeah, right.
Something simple like that. Well, I actually did have a technique question I wanted to ask you pertaining to how a drummer grips his or her sticks. You mentioned Bonnie Hunt. And, this is why I bring it up in one of your famous YouTube clips. I'm sure that non-drummers and even non-musicians have noticed the so-called traditional grip, the traditional jazz grip, which honestly looks a little awkward, where you hold the stick sort of between your fingers, as opposed to the overhand method you commonly see in the rock and pop community. It seems like most drummers commit to one or the other. And I'm interested in hearing, getting your take on the advantages and disadvantages of each. But in that Bonnie Hunt clip, you switch from one grip to the other, back and forth, while the song is in progress. Did you do that for a specific technical reason, or were you just goofing around?
I have to admit that I place a certain amount of importance in the aesthetics of drumming. And what I mean when I say that is, for me with drums, oftentimes we hear with our eyes. The way a drummer looks, the way a drummer addresses the drum kit, the way a drummer strikes a drum or a cymbal affects the way we hear it when we're watching them, the way they look. Are they very, very stiff? Are they playing with literally no wrist motion? Are they playing with tons of wrist motion? Are they playing with no arms? Are they playing like a gossamer condor? How are their shoulders moving? Are their shoulders grooving? Are they this or that? And so for me, I have to admit that I alter the way that I address the drum kit at times based on what I'm playing, the emotion behind it, the feeling I'm attempting to convey. And it's funny because I had an instructor at Berkeley. And this is kind of a funny story. I've kind of gone the other way since, but it's a funny story I'd like to share with you. I had an instructor at Berkeley, and one of our earlier lessons, he said, okay, why don't you just go ahead and play some time for me? And he was a jazz instructor, and at the time, I was looking to improve upon my jazz playing, or hoping to improve upon my jazz playing. So he said, okay, why don't you play some time for me? So I started playing time, spang, spang-a-lang, 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 and I'm playing, trad grip in my left hand. And so, whatever, 16 bars in, he stops me. He goes, hey, man, what are you doing? And I'm like, I don't know, what? And he says, what's that grip? What's that grip? And I go, I don't know, traditional grip? And he says, hey, look, I've seen you play around school. Why are you playing traditional grip? I know you're a match grip guy. I know you play match grip. And so he says, are you under some sort of romantic notion that because you're playing jazz, you have to play traditional grip? And I kind of said, well, it sounds dumb when you say it like that. But yes, and I was that was my impression. Now, his point to me was there have been many jazz drummers, great jazz drummers, who play match grip. So just because you're playing jazz doesn't mean you're supposed to switch to traditional grip for that. And his point was a good one, and I took it. That said, flash forward several years, many years, a couple of decades actually, and I will admit that now I do that. I do feel like if it's something that can put you in the right mindset or in the right sort of mental state to convey what you want to convey emotionally or musically, I feel like it's okay to do it. I feel like it's okay if you feel, and I'll speak for my own self personally, if I feel like, I'm doing a Stones song, if I play traditional grip, it's going to put me more in that idea of being Charlie Watts and playing the Stones. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so even though technically, can I work around the kit the same way? No, I can't. 3/4 of what I can do goes out the window. But for me, it puts me in that right emotional sense. Yeah. So that's why I do it. So in answer to the question, how do I approach, let's say, a genre or a feel or a style based upon what the proper grip might be? Or do I sit up straight, or do I kind of hunch over? Do I bob my shoulders half time, or do I go up and down, double time to what it is? All of that has been something that has sort of occurred naturally as I've become more intent upon conveying the emotion of a groove versus feeling like it's most important for me to be able to play the most stuff I can play. So I'll sacrifice the stuff I can play in order to convey the proper emotion.
Well, since we're talking about visuals and aesthetics, I never cease to be amazed by all the wild coincidences in life, because not only does the artist who designed your album cover have the same first name as your wife, she also has the same last name. And what were the odds of that?
Astronomical. Yes. Well, that is my wife, Nicole. And I asked her about it. I said, hey, could you do something about this? Could you, throw some artwork together for this? And she kind of said, okay, well, send me a couple of tracks. And there's a track on there called Sauntering Brontosaurus.
Yes,
and is. So she basically depicted Kenwood and myself, and we're quite serious, if you've noticed, in the artwork. But then, mysteriously, there's a brontosaurus over our shoulder. So that was her. Yeah, that was her. It was like, I want you guys to look really, really serious. But a brontosaurus sauntered in and it's hanging out. Hence the artwork. Yeah, that's my wife, Nicole. She's pretty talented, doggone it.
Yeah, well, it's unique. And it's funny because I told you when I played your album in the car one time, I had my boys with me. And usually if I try to play something that I like, instead of sticking with their, customized playlist, they immediately protest, like, what's this crap? We want to hear our stuff. But from the minute I turned it on, they didn't say a word. They just they took it all in. And I could tell that they both really dug it. But when they saw the artwork on my iPod, they immediately noticed that third presence between your two faces, but I did not. So I thought looking at it, like Jackson goes, oh, a dinosaur. I go, dinosaur? I mean, I knew there was a track, but then I saw the cover. Oh, there's a freaking dinosaur right between your two faces. How did I miss that?
Now, remind me, Dan, how old are your boys?
Yeah, they're 7 and 10. Jackson's 7 and Zachary's 10.
Please feel free to let them know that Kenwood and I have discussed already the idea that perhaps a children's book should accompany our next musical venture.
Yeah.
So I don't know. You may get to see the Brontosaurus take on a sort of character and a sort of life of his own.
That's great. And just get Nicole to go trademark that picture if you're going to start doing the kids these days all go through a dinosaur period, particularly boys, I guess. The reason I timed this the way I did to talk about Nicole's artwork is the next track we're going to play is that one, Sauntering Brontosaurus. And I really wanted to be able to say this. I wanted to be able to say, Webster's defines sauntering as to saunter. Like when when you get that, and then you look up saunter and it says see sauntering, and it's circular. It doesn't tell you anything, but that's not actually how they define it. Sauntering is defined as to walk in a slow, relaxed manner without hurry or effort. Synonyms include stroll, amble, wander, meander, drift, and mosey. So, yeah, I mean,
I like all those.
If you're a brontosaurus, or a patasaurus, you don't really have a lot of choice when you're that size. I think you do have to sort of amble along. But yeah, it's been a while since we've heard some music. So let's go ahead and check that one out. It's a really good one. From Funky Jazzy Stuff, here comes the Sauntering Brontosaurus.